From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
I'd like to welcome you to Immigration and Children's Literature, the Role of Heritage and Storytelling. It's sponsored by the Young Readers Center and the Center for the Book at the Library of Congress. This program is a sequel to our Diversity Symposium, which we hosted last spring and which many of you were participants. We had such a terrific response, both to the program and to the utility of the online webcast that followed, that we've expanded the conversation to explore the contribution of diverse cultural experiences from first and second generation Americans to literature for children and youth. I want to extend our gratitude to the Virginia Center for the Book at the Virginia Foundation for the Humanities and the Maryland Center for the Book at Maryland Humanities for supporting this program again this year. Also, our colleagues at the Center for the Book, most specifically Dr. John Cole and Bonnie and Guy LaMolinara, and the YRC staff, Kaheen Mohammed, Monica Valentine, and to our interns and volunteers who always make what we do possible. This exchange comes at a critical time in our national conversation about America and its immigrants. And thinking about that role, the role that culture has in this conversation, and literature in particular, I'd like to go back to 1947 when Rodgers and Hammerstein premiered South Pacific on Broadway, based on the book Tales of the South Pacific by James Michener. The song that stirred quite a controversy was "You've Got to Be Carefully Taught." And here quickly is a first stanza. You've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year. It's got to be drummed in your dear little ear. You've got to be carefully taught. Many letters in the papers of Oscar Hammerstein at the Library of Congress demonstrated the polarizing nature of this tune, very much meant by both Rodgers and Hammerstein to be a comment on the racial prejudice of the times. And by the way, the library has the piano vocal scores of South Pacific in the Performing Arts Reading Room and the sound recording of the original Broadway cast in the Recorded Sound Reference Center. But our conversation today takes a very different and optimistic turn. Our premise does include the value of language in education, but from a different place, by sharing values, culture, and stories from their heritage, our authors and illustrator make positive contributions to the future of our children. And we're going to hear about some examples this afternoon. Our first author, Meg Medina, also serving as the moderator for the discussion. Meg has been a collaborator both last year's symposium as well as today's program. And we're so grateful for her wisdom, creativity, and passion for her profession and for her compatriots. Meg is an award-winning Cuban-American author who writes picture books, middle grade, and YA fiction. She's the 2014 recipient of Pura Belprix Medal and the 2013 Sybil's Fiction winner for her young adult novel, Yaqui Delgado Wants to Kick Your Ass. Everybody always makes a noise about that, Meg. And in 2015, her picture book, Mango, Abuelo, and Me, was a Pura Belprix Honor Medal. She is also the 2012 Ezra Jack Keats New Writers Medal winner for her picture book, Tia Isa Wants a Car. Her other books are The Girl Who Could Silence the Wind, a 2012 Bank Street Best Book and CBI recommended read in the UK, and Milagros Girl from Away. Her newest novel, Burn Baby Burn, has earned 4-star reviews and is a Junior Library Guild selection. Perhaps the most revealing accolade is her 2014 nomination from CNN when she was named one of CNN 10 Visionary Women in America for her work to support girls, Latino youth, and diversity in children's literature. I now turn the program over to Meg, who will introduce her colleagues and lead the discussion, including a 20-minute Q&A at the end. At the conclusion of the program, we'll have a book signing with all of our panelists. Meg?
So I have my phone up here not because I'm waiting for an important call, but because I talk too much and I want to make sure that I get everything in that we have to get in today. So good afternoon, everybody, and it is such a pleasure to be here with all of you today at the Library of Congress, which I think is easily one of my favorite places in the world. Whether I'm touring the beautiful rooms in the Jefferson building, or whether I'm here tucked away in the Madison building doing research as I did here for Burn Baby Burn, it's safe to say that I think that the library is a place that stands for our best ideals about the written word and the power of being a literate and engaged people. So many, many thanks to Karen Jaffe and the Young Readers Center for this kind invitation to me and to all of these authors, and for this wonderful opportunity to be with all of you today. So I have been looking forward to this afternoon's conversation about immigration and children's literature for months. I am myself the daughter of Cuban immigrants, the wife of an immigrant, and a children's book author who seeks to write about all the places where childhood culture and family meet. It's my life's work, really. And it's a privilege and a joyous work, even when I'm writing about the harder aspects of a dual identity and that strain. I find myself in exceptional company this afternoon with a group of talented up-and-coming authors who we've invited because they bring to their work what we decided was a very nuanced and authentic voice, and because they represent a range of nations and a variety of points on the continuum of what we collectively call immigrants. Today the goal is to talk about to each other and discover how the immigrant experience shapes us as writers and why it matters to us to voice our experience in works for children. And of course, our hope is that this conversation offers you a window inside immigrant children and their families, and a roadmap for how to use diverse stories with children in your personal and professional lives. Our hope is that today's conversation strengthens our collective commitment to plural narratives in children's fiction, so that all of us who are American can feel valued and included. As groundwork, some statistics from the Migration Policy Institute here in Washington, D.C. that you might find interesting. As of 2016, the U.S. foreign-born population and the U.S.-born children accounted for 81 million people, more than a quarter of our population. In 2014, 1.3 million people migrated to the U.S., a figure that includes estimates of the undocumented. The top countries of origin in order were India, China, Mexico, Canada, and the Philippines. And for those of you who work with children and families, you might be interested to know that in 2014, 17.5 million children lived with at least one parent who was an immigrant. And interestingly, 88% of children of immigrant parents are born in the United States and are therefore second-generation Americans. All of those figures represent a quadruple growth in the immigrants present in the U.S. since 1970. So yes, we are a nation of immigrants, and our collective identity is based on the Statue of Liberty. Give me your poor, your tired masses, and all the rest of that inscribed at the base of the Statue of Liberty. But as we know, especially in this election year, there is considerable backlash against the foreign-born in our country. This nativist rhetoric is nothing new, sadly. It's what Dr. Alan Kraut of American University refers to as old wine in new bottles. Our nation, unfortunately, has a history of nativist sentiments, particularly in times of economic downturn. Throughout history, we've selected different groups to target with suspicions of their religion, with accusations that they bring disease or lawlessness, that they are a threat to civil order or our national security. So think of anti-Catholicism with regard to Irish and Germans in the early 20th century and the backlash against Muslim Americans today. Think of quota systems to limit the foreign-born and legislations like the Chinese Exclusion Act of the 1800s. Think of internment camps for Japanese Americans in World War II, and think today of these conversations about sparkling walls that we will build at our borders. And yet, we are all here, all Americans, all trying to find a way forward and a way to love families and children. And in this effort, we turn as a people, as we always have, I think, to the arts, to help us name the experience and to build bridges. So today, I'd like to introduce these wonderful colleagues who'll speak on how immigrant identity impacts their works for children. If you are tweeting, parentheses, you would use the hashtag, please, Young Readers Immigration, and also tag @LibraryCongress. All right, on the end, Aisha Saeed is a Pakistani-American author of several works, including her beautiful debut young adult novel, Written in the Stars, which came out of Penguin in 2015. And the upcoming middle grade novel, This Promise I Will Keep, also Penguin, and we can expect it in 2017. Her work also has appeared in anthologies such as Love, Inshallah, The Secret Love Lives of American Muslim Women, that came out of Soft Skull in 2012, and Faithfully Feminist, which came out of White Cloud Press in 2015. Aisha is also one of the founding members of the nonprofit We Need Diverse Books. She lives in Atlanta with her husband and her 3 sons, including a little baby who is just born this year. And she's represented by Taylor Martindale of Full Circle Literary. Beside her, many of you know the fabulous Wendy Wan-Long Shang. Her most recent book is The Way Home Looks Now, which was inspired by Taiwan's dominance of the Little League World Series and her father's experience coaching baseball in the early 1970s. Home is a Junior Library Guild selection and a pick by BookPage's Best of the Year list. Her debut novel, which is when I first fell in love with Wendy, was The Great Wall of Lucy Wu, which came out of Scholastic and received the Asian Pacific American Librarians Association Children's Literature Award, as well as recognition on several state reading lists. When she is not writing, Wendy volunteers with her local library and roots for the Nationals with her husband and her 3 children. Beside her, Elizabeth Zunan. Drawing and painting have always been among the most important things to Elizabeth Zunan. She was born in Albany, New York, and grew up on the Ivory Coast, West Africa. Surrounded by the bright, vibrant colors of everyday West African fabrics and tropical vegetation, Elizabeth's love of color and pattern grew, lingered, and is a fixture today of all of her works. After returning to the U.S., Elizabeth attended Rhode Island School of Design and graduated in 2006. Her picture book, The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, Dial Books, was an Amazon Best Books for Children in 2012 and received other awards. Elizabeth now lives in Albany, where she explores a multicultural world through painting, beading, sewing, collage, in fine art painting from her own imagination, and in published children's book, where she brings to life others' stories. Her 9th illustrated children's book is The Legendary Miss Lena Horne, which is from Simon & Schuster and will publish next year in 2017. And last but certainly not least, my good friend, René Colato Lainez. He is an award-winning Salvadoran author of many multicultural books, including Vámonos, Let's Go, The Tooth Fairy Meets El Ratón, and From North to South. He's a graduate of the Vermont College MFA program in writing for children and young adults. René is a bilingual elementary school teacher at Fernandes Elementary School, where the students know him as the teacher full of stories. His goal as an author is to produce good multicultural literature, stories where minority children are portrayed in a positive way, where they can see themselves as heroes and where they can dream and have hopes for their future. He wants to write authentic stories of Latin American children living in the United States. Will you please help me welcome? So the first question I have is really just to sort of place us, because immigration is in fact a continuum from a person who has arrived yesterday to a person whose family has been here for some time. So René, can we start with you?
Sure.
Can you just sort of place us where you are from originally and where you fall in the immigrant continuum?
I was born in El Salvador, and due to the Civil War, my father and I have to leave the country. My mother was already here in the United States, and I remember that we left in early morning. I had brand new shoes, and I loved those shoes so much. And through the journey, those new shoes became worn and old with holes everywhere. It was a trip of 3 months from El Salvador to the United States. So I had been in every single step of the immigrant experience, first as an undocumented immigrant. Then later on, I was able to get a work permit to start working. Then my mom qualified for the amnesty program, so she became a resident, and she applied for my residence. And finally, I became a USA citizen, so I have been everywhere, and I am happy to be here.
I was actually born here in the United States. My mother's family has been here for many, many years. My father came here from the Ivory Coast in the 70s to study at the State University of New York in Albany, and that's where they met. So growing up in the Ivory Coast, we lived there until I was almost 13. I did most of my schooling there, but we came back to the Albany area almost every summer to visit my grandparents. So I feel like no matter what country I was in, I was always looked at as the other. When I was living in the Ivory Coast, which is a French-speaking country, many of the kids referred to me as l'Américaine. And when I came here, sometimes the kids would refer to me as, oh, that girl from Africa. So I was kind of always had one foot in two different cultures and kind of always in between. But I've been here for full-time for almost 19 years now, so I consider myself a biracial African-American.
Hi, I'm Wendy Shang. I was also born in the United States. My parents, my mom's right there.
Yay!
My parents came here in the late 1950s, early 1960s to study, and by the time I was born, they were already American citizens. But I would say that even under, kind of rather ideal circumstances for coming here, that there is still that dual identity. And also, I grew up in Northern Virginia, and it's hard. We live there now, and I tell my kids, I was the only Asian kid in my elementary school, and they really cannot conceive of that now. And I always tell them, and I remember the second Asian kid to show up in school.
And so I'm Pakistani American. I was born in Miami, Florida, but my father immigrated to the United States in the 1960s as well, and he was an electrical engineer there. When he came here, he found out that even though he had that degree and experience, he kind of needed to start over here. So he started off working, I think, Jersey subs and working his way back up, went to school and got another degree and became an engineer again here in the U.S. And even though I was born and raised here, I was telling Meg earlier, I felt like I didn't maybe go to Pakistan that much, but Pakistan came to me because all of our friends growing up were Pakistani American, like me. All of my relatives over the years from the time I was about 18 months old slowly began immigrating to the U.S., and our home was the doorstep that they always arrived at. And so all the way until I was pretty much in college, I always was having people from Pakistan coming and immigrating and coming through our home in order to settle down. So So yeah, that's my story.
So what are some of the topics that you think of as very culturally specific to your group that find their way into your work? So for example, I often look at strong women in my work, machismo in my work, lack of language, those kinds of things. What do you pull from inside of your cultural experience to put in your books? And any one of you can answer.
For me, it's equality, because even though we are of different colors, we speak different languages, at the end we are all children of planet Earth. So in my book, I see the equality. If we can sing in English, we can also sing in Spanish, the same song, and we can have fun together. We have heroes, Latino heroes, American heroes. For my idea is why to fight for, because I am different from you. But together we can have fun. And we can have double the fun, double the culture. And also in my work, you can see the immigrant child, especially that immigrant child that is insecure, the child who has dreams for the future, but at that point he has a problem related with culture or with immigration, and he wants to continue, he wants to succeed. So I'm telling them, yes, you can do it. It happened to me. I know it is happening to you right now, but there is always a light at the end of the tunnel. So that's the main focus on my work.
I think for me growing up, I loved to read. I started reading when I think I was 3 years old. I just loved to read, but I never saw myself in books, and I never knew that I wasn't seeing myself in books because I didn't know that I should be in the books. And so, I mean, I think it wasn't until college that I actually read a book where there was somebody from my culture represented. And so, and that was a very, very moving experience for me to see a cover. It was Shabanu, Daughter of the Wind, and I remember just reading it. It had nothing to do with my life or upbringing, but there was so much I saw of myself in that book anyways. And so, so when I write books, because of that lifelong experience I have, it's very important to me that my stories reflect Pakistani Americans. They're not generalized. Everyone has a different experience, and but I did definitely my upbringing and my culture. In my book is about a girl who's forced into a marriage. I was not, but a lot of the cultural aspects in it, like how her parents were just very nervous about how she related to Western society and how much they wanted her to stay a part of their culture. All of that I put in my book, and it's been very gratifying to hear from other South Asian children and other Muslim kids who've read the book and said, yeah, that's me, because I never had that. And so for me, that's a very important part of writing for young people, is to give them that mirror in the book that reflects their own experiences.
I was going to say, I think for my book, and it was about the sense that you are representing, if you are not of many people, that what you do is you are representing everyone. I remember my dad always telling me, what you do represents our family and represents our people. No pressure, you know. and
I know that horror.
And
yeah.
there is that there, and I think in my second book, The Way Home Looks Now, there is that sensibility of wanting to maintain that facade of everything is okay from the father, even though things are not okay.
Yeah. I think Wendy you touched on such an important point. When writing about your culture, there are bad parts about your culture too. Like there's the forced marriage in my book, and that is a challenge when you want to reflect a mirror, but then you're also sometimes putting a mirror onto things that, and you don't want to do that. You don't want to be the one that put that bad thing out there, but it also needs to be talked about too. So
I was thinking about that earlier, because I was thinking also, sometimes you're right, in North to South, for example, you're writing about a mom who's deported, right? And you're writing about a forced marriage. And so are there moments, and then I'm going to get back to the other question. We knew this would happen. We'd start going. So what do we do collectively? There are moments where you're writing about something that you know is going to set somebody's hair on fire, right? Or you're going to receive heavy criticism for it. Or does that ever creep into you? Like, do you ever say, oh, I don't want to say that, or what do you think? Like when you're writing about undocumented children or undocumented parents?
Yes, for example, My Shoes and I is a story of me crossing 3 borders from El Salvador to the United States. And since I was writing it, I knew I could see people talking, oh, this book is about illegal immigration, someone crossing a river. But then I wrote it, and I knew that it would be a hard book. At the same time, the same year, From North to South was published, and this book is about a mom who is deported to Mexico because she doesn't have the right papers to live in the United States. And I remember a reviewer, the same person, reviewed the two books, and one said, this book is excellent because we are deporting people who are illegal. And this book is terrible because someone is crossing the border. And it is written by the same author. So I said, I know that people are talking about it, but my focus is for those. So we can hear, there are many different ways to immigrate. And I think children and the population needs to hear the different voices too. And one voice is as important as the other.
Yeah. And so there are those hard corners, and then there are these beautiful corners as well. And it brings me to Liz's work and also to Wendy's, because in the books that you illustrate, Liz, you're often working on heroes of other cultures. The Boy Who Could Harness the Wind, if you could talk a little bit about that book, and also One Plastic Bag, and Wendy, the history and the heroes associated with Taiwan, and so on. So Liz, you first. Tell us about that, about the process of writing, introducing the heroes of one culture to children here.
Well, as the illustrator, I'm tasked with visually depicting the characters for an American audience. And the case of The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, it's a story about a young boy who's 14 years old in Malawi in East Africa, and he lives in a farming community, and there happens to be a very bad drought that particular year, and all of his family's crops, corn and tobacco crops, die, and they are not able to earn any money for him to keep going to school, so he has to drop out of school, and he ends up finding a library down the road that has a lot of science books. He finds a science book called Using Energy, and he figures out from the pictures in this book how to build a windmill. So he goes to the local junkyard, he takes all these pieces of scrap metal and rubber, and he finds a tire from a bicycle and an old light bulb and all these scraps of things, and he brings them home, and he kind of cobbles them together and makes an actual working windmill. And when I was tasked with illustrating this book, I thought, okay, I've never been to Malawi, I've never been to East Africa. He lives in a very different country than my experience in the Ivory Coast. The Ivory Coast is the city that I lived in is very cosmopolitan. You know, I didn't spend a lot of time in the countryside. I didn't know any farmers. So I figured, what about his life can I kind of appropriate and kind of use in my process of creating the illustrations. So his process of going to the junkyard and collecting all these different pieces of things reminded me of my process of collage, which is how I create the illustrations for the books. I use oil paint to paint the faces and the skies and the ground, and then a lot of the fabric the people are wearing for the clothing, houses, trees, and things like that, I used by taking colorful paper and fabric that I've collected that has different patterns and things on it, and I cut them out and I glue them to create one piece of art. So that's one way that I kind of associated myself with William's experience, even though my life was nothing like his.
And he's real. William
he's a real
exists.
person.
I mean, it's actually happened. And the plastic bag is the same sort of heroic, simple, the heroic in the ordinary person.
Yeah.
I found that so empowering.
Yeah, One Plastic Bag, the recycling women of the Gambia, West Africa, was an opportunity for me to illustrate a story about a crafter. And that's another thing that I do when I'm not illustrating books, is I make jewelry and purses and I sell them at local craft fairs. So it was a way for me to identify with this woman, Aisha in the story, who lives in a small village where there's a lot of plastic bag trash floating around. And I thought the feeling that she must get from making something with her bare hands and then going out and sharing it with the public and hoping that somebody likes it enough to buy it is a feeling that I I have too when I go to craft fairs and I have a table full of my things and I'm hoping, okay, I hope I can like make my money back from this today. So those are the little things that I pick out of these characters' lives that I can associate with myself, either with the process of illustrating the book by collecting different things or the feelings that they must go through in the books.
Yeah. Wendy, I'm going to talk to you about humor. And also, Rene, I'm going to throw you under the bus for this one, too, because you're both really funny people. And if you would talk a little bit, oh, shit. So I remember laughing out loud. Certainly, The Way Home Looks Now is not a comic novel, but The Great Wall of Lucy Wu was. I remember laughing out loud several times over Yipo and your main character's relationship. And also, Rene, in the big mishmash of what happens when the Tooth Fairy meets Ratoncito Perez and so on. So, Wendy, why don't we start with you? Like, how do you go about grabbing humor and how, especially as it relates to, you know, against the backdrop of Chinese American culture, et cetera?
Yeah, you know, I find the mechanics of like writing humor, you know, it's the old, you know, what dying is easy, comedy is hard, and I think. Just generally is to not aim straight for it, but to write the scene and then find the funny in it, and then start pulling it out. And for example, in The Great Wall of Lucy Wu, Lucy finds out that she has to give up basketball to go to Chinese school, and she is furious. And so, you know, that's the first layer, you know, is I'm really mad. And then, you know, second, third pass, it's like, she's going to write a song about this, you know. And so she has a protest song that she sings. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Chinese school is not for me.
Yeah.
And so you know, it's just, you know, and I think, you know, humor is always finding the unexpected connection between things. And I think, you know, especially multicultural literature, that's so important, is to find out that the person you thought you had nothing in common with is has something that you both can be joyous about.
Yeah. And how about in your work? Because I think it's hilarious to be, do you know, tell them about who Ratoncito Perez is. They may not know.
Ratoncito Perez is a tooth collector from Latin America.
Did you know?
Yeah. And as in El Salvador, I grew up with the idea of Ratoncito Perez. And when I came to the United States, they talked to me about a tooth fairy. And I was confused. Who is a tooth fairy? For me, at that point, the tooth fairy was the one from Cinderella and Sleeping Beauty. And I couldn't believe that fairy collecting tooth from children. So my story is about Miguelito. He lost his first diente. And of course, because he speaks English and Spanish, Raton Perez said, this is a new one for me. I need to get to Miguelito's house and get it. But at the same time, the tooth fairy said, this is my territory. So this belongs to me. So in that book is a confrontation of mine, mío, 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 to see who will get it. And I think I use my teacher's voice because I teach kindergarten, and the children say, the funny teacher, he's funny.
He is funny, they're right. So cute. So you do this mishmash, and you bring up also that you are a teacher. And so as I was thinking about my own work and your work collectively, like in your dream, in your mind, how do you want educators to use your book with young people? If you could prescribe this for them, like please use this book this way. For example, I will often tell teachers, please don't have them do vocabulary lists and answer questions at the end of the chapter. I'll be really mad at you if you do that. Yeah. And let's start with Aisha. How would you want Written in the Stars used in a classroom with students?
Well, that's a good question. I think, no vocabulary test. Then they will hate my book. But one way that I just actually was going to do a school visit, and I walked in on a teacher, and what they had done was they took my book, and they took American Born Chinese by Jean. Yeah. And so they were looking at the similarities between the books and the differences. And I had not actually read his book at that point. I had it, but I hadn't read it. So I went home and read it, and it's a graphic novel. It's completely different. It has nothing to do with my book, but I loved that they took two totally different books and were researching what they have in common, what they don't. I really would love for teachers to use it as a way to look at the specific aspects of Pakistan that are covered in the book, but also take from there, what are the things we share in common just universally with the themes in this book. For example, parents do exert pressure, not just Pakistani parents. All parents and children have that yin-yang of, I want to do this and no, you can't do that. And when is that too much? When is that okay? I think there's a lot of themes in the book that are specific, but that can be related to. And so I think I would love to see it used as a way to learn about Pakistan, but also to highlight how are we the same as well.
My mind went in like two totally opposite directions
Okay.
with that question. I mean, on the one hand, I mean, I would just like my book to be used like any other book that gets to go in the classroom. And you know, sometimes you get in that danger of being pigeonholed, or, you know, like, I know I have a friend whose children go to immersion school in San Francisco, and she sent me the reading list, and both of my books are on there. Like that never happens. But I would love, you know, for classrooms that don't necessarily have, you know, Chinese American students in them to be open to the book, you know, and then, you know, boy book, girl book, you know, who's interested in this book? And I would hope that it would be opened up to that.
Yeah.
And then the other direction my mind went was, in both of my books, there are adults who don't always say what they are thinking. But as a writer, I know what they're thinking, and I know why they did what they did. And I think it would be really cool for teachers to invite their students to rewrite a scene from the other character's perspective, and as a way of learning to see that, you know, sometimes people behave in a certain way, and that they might have a completely different set of motivations than what you are initially tempted to think.
Fascinating.
I like the idea of using my books as a jumping off point for other creative projects. For example, One Plastic Bag is about women who use strips of plastic bags to crochet little change purses. So I do a lot of school visits where I bring all these strips of colorful plastic bags, and I'll bring empty plastic yogurt cups or other cardboard or plastic items, and we'll have like, what can you invent with these things? What can you create? What kind of fashion accessories can you make with these? With The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, I like to, you know, put in some science, technology, engineering, and math in there. Like, if you could create any invention that would solve a problem in the world, what would it be? And I like to ask different groups of, especially elementary school students, to identify a problem in their community and then sit down and draw a thing that could fix or help that problem, or make a machine that would solve that problem using found objects.
Yeah, that sounds to me like a really empowering thing. You know, to take an example of what William did in his life and sort of apply it to your own. And how about you, Wendy?
Yeah, for me, it's to children and teachers to open new doors, new windows, new horizons, to discover new ways, new games. I have a book called Playing Loteria, and it is always nice to see, after reading the book, all the children playing Mexican bingo. And even though all the pictures are in Spanish, I can see the big smile, and they are translating at the same time, looking at the picture. And that is culture for them. So, and also for the Tooth Fairy and Raton Perez, at the end of the book, children say, oh, for my next one, I would like that little mouse to come to my house too. So, and that is great for me, that because of a book, they discover a new hero or a new game, a new song.
Yep.
Yeah.
I also like, we were talking earlier, we sat outside in the sunshine. We got here a little early, and you know, Rene's books come out in bilingual format often, and my books come out in English editions and Spanish editions, right? They're separate. Some of it's design, and we talked about the pros and cons of that as well, because sometimes, you know, the role of books for families that are multilingual, where grandparents don't speak the same language as the parents, as the children. And so for me, I feel a certain urgency around making sure that we have editions, either bilingual or dual language, so that families can rally around story that names their experience, but in the languages that they're most comfortable with. And then I wanted to ask you also sort of a difficult question, because certainly children are not immune to what they see on television, what they're hearing in the news, and the conversations that are coming from the lips of adults in the world. And so I guess the question I have for maybe Aisha, Renee, or anybody really what is the role of books right now when we have so many really ugly characterizations of immigrant children or immigrant families? So when I'm asking this question, because I know, Aisha, for example, you're raising 3 sons. And what do you say? I've heard, you and I have talked about this, you've expressed this, like there are moments of injury. And you've probably seen this with your students, where people say really painful, awful things. What is the role of our work to address that? Is there a role?
I think, I mean, one thing for me personally as a mom, my oldest son, he's ending kindergarten actually next week, but his first week of kindergarten, I had to pull him out just after 1 week, because every single day from the first day he was bullied, called racial slurs, religious slurs by other fellow 5-year-olds and shoved to the ground. And I had to withdraw him and take him to a safer place. And he is in a safer place and he's thrived there. But, you know, the things that he was saying, the children were saying, the things that he came home, like started asking me, how can I get lighter? Why is my skin this color? All these questions. You know, somebody taught them that, and I just feel like now more than ever, the role of teachers and librarians and others that come in contact with children who are getting these messages is to counter those messages, and the most powerful way is through a book and through reading a book about another child who they can suddenly relate to, even though back home their parents are teaching them certain things and there's certain news stations on telling them certain things that in the background. They can read a book and say, wait. And so they may never meet somebody like that, but they can, that prejudice could possibly be affected. And it's actually one of the reasons I've started thinking about writing picture books sometime in the future, just because it is a very, very serious issue. And it's not just my son, it's happening. I mean, the percentages in California, they did a study, and I think it was 75% of Muslim teens in high school have reported bullying or harassment, 75%. So it's a really big issue. And I mean, books alone can't do it, but I do think that they are a powerful resource. That gatekeepers that are, you know, librarians, teachers, and can get in the hands of children and potentially make a difference. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for example, my student, their parents speak Spanish, and they are trying to speak English, and for many of them, Spanish is not enough. Spanish is not good. Spanish is not cool. They have to speak English because everyone are speaking in English. So I think I am writing books to tell those children Spanish is good. You can speak English, you can speak Spanish, you can play games in English, you can play games in Spanish. So that's my main goal. That's why I am writing about equality. You can have the Tooth Fairy, of course, it's wonderful. But also you can have a Ratoncito Pérez. And also let's play football in football. You can play football, which means soccer in Spanish, and you can play football, which is American. Football in Spanish, and even though football sounds similar to football, there are 2 different games, and you can have fun in both of them.
Can you tell them a little bit about My Mother's an Alien? This one cracked me up. I looked at the cover and I said, oh, it's sort of a science fiction story. What a new thing. And then Brennan said to me, no. Tell them what the twist on
that book is about Sophia, and she has discovered a big secret. By accident, she found out a little card, Mama's card, and Mama's picture is in there, and also the word alien. So she believed that her mother is an alien.
You gotta love it. You can't make this stuff up.
And when Sophia asked, Mama, is this really you? Is this a real card? And Mama said, of course it is, Mika. I always wanted this car. The day that I received this car, it was a wonderful day. So Sophia now, she's really believed that Mom is an alien. And this is my new book coming out in July.
It comes out in July, so you got to pre-order.
Yeah.
And I think we are almost, I'm checking, okay, I have 1 minute, so I'm going to put this in. And so some of us publish with large presses and some with small presses, right? And so, and for those of you who don't know, Simon & Schuster announced this year Salam Reads, which is a new imprint that deals with Muslim literature or Muslim characters and so on. So that seemed to me so hopeful when I saw it, and we have Cinco Punto presses. We have places that we go to. But can you talk a little bit about your experiences? Large press, small press, which has been, how's that worked for you? Wendy, I know you publish in a big...
Yeah, I'm with Scholastic.
Yeah, it's as big as it gets. Yes.
It is, and when I first saw it, I was like, well, I don't have anything to say about small presses. And then in the last week, I had the pleasure of I don't know, Kathy Crutcher? Is Kathy Crutcher here? Is a woman who developed a model where she partners with local nonprofits and encourages kids to write and publish their own stories. And they're beautifully done, you know, nice everything, and they're fantastic looking. And then I was made aware of B'nai B'rith has a Diverse Minds book contest where they encourage young people to write stories incorporating diversity. There's like a $5,000 first prize, and their stories get published. So I'm not in it, but I can definitely see where it's coming from, and I'm supporting them as best I can.
Any last thoughts? Okay, I see the microphone coming around. So here's the deal. If you have a question, you have to wait for the microphone because you're being recorded. No pressure. So you're being recorded, and I really encourage you to ask these wonderful people anything that's on your mind. So, questions? Oh, great. In the back? Well, hold on for the microphone. Here, come.
Hi. It's always nice to be here at this program, but I have a couple of questions. First, I'm a retired school librarian, so I'm always glad to meet authors. I'm also on the board of the Children's Africana Book Awards program, so I'm glad to meet the children's illustrator. And my question is mainly for Aisha or anybody else who wants to answer. I really liked your comment where you said that as you were growing up, you didn't know that you should see yourself in books, so you didn't really miss it. And in another comment, you mentioned that you want your book treated like any other books. Well, I grew up in Washington, D.C., and like you, I didn't really see myself in books. But it was okay, right? And I think sometimes those who don't know, they say, oh, those poor, deprived children, how did they manage? But the question then, and it's for you or anybody else, how can we explain to people that even though we didn't grow up seeing ourselves, and on another note, I do want to say, there actually were books written. For instance, here in Washington, you can go to the Moreland Spingarn Research Center and just see books written about African Americans from the beginning of time almost. Go to Alexandria, you know, in Egypt. But anyway, the point is, for the most part, we didn't see ourselves
Accurately.
Accurately, that's the other piece. Because if we might have seen the Tarzan, the Sambos, and so on. But I guess it didn't mean that much to us. Or, you know, we weren't astute enough to be offended. So.
Well, that's changed.
At that time. Yes, it is definitely
I'm
changed.
here to tell you.
Right, exactly. But I have to say this. I was in a museum, a school museum right in Arlington a couple of years ago, where they had a classroom set up, and they had some old books slid into the little old wooden desks, and there actually was a little black Sambo book in there, and I had to bring it to the attention of the director there. But how do we explain to people the history of how this has all evolved?
I mean, for me personally, just because I didn't see myself in a book and I, as a 7-year-old, wasn't bothered by it, doesn't mean that it wasn't a problem. And I think just because I didn't see myself in a book, I still felt like the other because of that. I just didn't know how to articulate it as a child or as a teenager, but I did. When I would write my own stories, because I love to write, I never wrote about Pakistani Americans ever, or Muslims, because I never saw it. So, like I said, it was only until college when I saw that book, and then I started talking. I was a bookseller briefly, and I talked to other booksellers, and they're like, no, you should write your stories if you want to, that I started doing it. So I think, yeah, I mean, I didn't miss it because I didn't know that I could have it, but I think I was deprived for it. My children do not have that because there's Salam reads and there's all these, like, and people are taking chances on books now that they weren't back then, and there are more books being published. And I see my son, he sees Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel, she's a Pakistani American teenager, and when I saw that first edition, I cried. My son was like, yeah, okay, cool, that's neat, because he has a library. There's not enough in there should be more, but he has much more than I ever did. And so I think I see how it matters to him. I see how it helps him feel like he belongs. So yeah, so when people say, well, it didn't bother you then, I'm like, it should have. I just didn't know better, like you said. So.
Well, I wonder if it's the right question to ask, were you harmed? And maybe the better question is, what more could you do if you saw yourself in books?
Yeah.
And you know, how much more of your potential could you reach if you saw yourself as the hero in the story and every other place?
I think you're right.
If ever there was a year that proved post-racial society is nowhere close, it would be this year. But I'm doing exit interviews with students right now, and for the first time ever, I'm asking them to identify. I always ask for demographics, you know, please give me your race or ethnicity. This year, quite a number of them are calling themselves Americans. And it does have me thinking, what does a post-racial society actually look like for the young? And how long do you think it's going to take us to get there?
I'm so glad I'm the moderator. Yeah, what do you think? What do you think, guys? I have some thoughts. I'll save them if they need to. Go ahead. Tell me, what do you think?
You know, it's really, you know, you meet people and they're like, you know, there's like, I don't see race.
But they do.
Yeah, but that's
ridiculous.
Well, first of all, that's a very
Right.
privileged thing to be able to say.
Correct.
Because, I mean, you know, because whether or not you choose to see people doesn't affect how other people get seen. And I think we're kind of reaching that point where, okay, like, you know, we see it, let's talk about it, and you want a timeline?
I think the big lapse also is that what's really difficult, of course, when you have conversations that deal with people's perceptions in books around race and so on, is that any conversation surrounding race in the United States is a very delicate one. And it comes against a really complicated and painful context. And so everyone gets worked up. It is hard on both ends. It's hard to be on the receiving end of something and point it out and have people say, that's not what I meant. I didn't mean to injure you. I'm not racist, but, you know, those kinds of things. It's a hard conversation. And I find myself sometimes moving through the world with like this little invisible plaque over my head. I come in peace, right? That's really what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to make people feel comfortable at the same time that I'm telling them the truth of what's happening. So I looked at my World Book Encyclopedia Childcraft. Do you remember those? If you're old, you remember. I had a set of those, and my favorite one was Volume 9, Make and Do. And anyway, I looked through it recently because I have it, and there's not a single child of color, any color, on the pages. And it was my favorite book, and I wasn't there. I don't know what it's going to look like. I think that right now, sometimes I worry that when people dive into, I'm American, I don't see color, I think that that is a very telling statement and a worrisome statement. Because if your eyes work, you do in fact see color. You do in fact see what people look like. The real question is, what do you see here and here in your heart in terms of how you interpret and embrace. Hello, Eleanor.
I have a question for you guys. Okay, Kirkus Reviews have started naming race in their reviews, right? Have you seen them?
I saw one and I was I sat there and just stared at it. I was like, wait, what?
The race of what?
Of
White
the
people.
characters in the books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
Everyone.
read
Not the
one.
reviewer.
No. Yeah.
So I actually read one of the reviews, and it went out of its way to call out the white characters. The white character, white character, white character. I started laughing really, really hard because I was so unused to it. So what do you guys think about that now?
I was like you, I started laughing. So I need to process it a little bit more. I think it's great because that's my initial reaction, that it's great. Because if you feel the need to point out in a story about basketball that the main character and the whole story is all about basketball, you need to point out that the main character is a certain race other than white, then why not point out that they are white? I think fair's fair, but like you, it made me laugh, and it made me so it stayed with me, and that's kind of telling that it stayed with me so much just for the fact that they named who the main character was. It was interesting.
I have a little anecdote to do with that. My mother is white, my father is black, and when I was applying to college, I refused to check only one box, and I refused to check the other box for race. So I always checked white and the box for the white and black. And I got into school, and after the end of my junior year in college, I needed to find a new work-study job. So I applied to work at the Multicultural Affairs office at my college. And when I showed up there, they said, well, we've never heard of you. How long have you been at this school? And I said, I've been at this school for 3 years. I'm about to be a senior. And so they looked in their paperwork because they had a list of all of the students of color attending the school. And when they found my name, they saw that next to my name it said white. And they all started to laugh like, ha, 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 Liz, we've never heard of you because you've been white for 3 years and you're just showing up here now. And then I thought, yeah, it's funny because according to the school, I am white, but if you look at me, maybe you don't see white, but I'm, as far as my DNA, I'm equally white than I am black. So should we be laughing at the fact that, oh, Liz is white? It was a very weird feeling.
It is.
Yeah, and for me, many people think that I am Filipino. And one time I was speaking with this person in English, and finally I said something in Spanish, and he said, ¿Hablas español? I thought you were from the Philippines. Yeah. He said, and that's Latinos. Latinos, we have all the colors of the world.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the biggest misconception of
Yeah.
Latino culture because
Yeah.
we come across every
Right.
every race.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Roxana with First Book, and I just want to say what a pleasure it is to actually use your books for family engagement opportunities. It's one of the things that educators from our network say all the time, that how to actually use a book in a way that it brings conversation that is extended from the classroom into the home. And I know for a fact that your books have done that. So just really wanted to say thank you for your work.
Here.
Yes, hi, thank you. It's been a wonderful conversation. I'm also work with the schools, with the family and community engagement, and been experienced with many programs, and always looking for books that bring, interesting perspectives on race and culture and gender as well. And what I find myself sometimes struggling and a little bit turned off, and now I'm more hesitant, is that there seems to be a tendency among writers of those books to choose topics that are real topics, like they say poverty or racism or even historical situations in the past, in which I have found when you read them to kids, I find myself torn and a little problematic, because they are, in a sense, kids that are identified with those characters. They are embarrassed. For example, you have a book with something about Mexico, just inventing something here. And then you see all the little Mexican kids without shoes and, and really ugly looking parents or very poor or things like that. And it's a real, kind of embarrassment for them. Or the same when you deal with certain issues about slavery and things like that. So I'm curious about your thoughts about that, because I'm always looking for books that affirm kids, and especially when they are in elementary school. I think with middle school, secondary, high school is a different thing because we can have more deep conversations about racism and inequality and injustice. And I do go there with elementary kids. It's not that I am avoiding the topic, but I am trying to look for those other books that, create a sense of empowerment in kids, of hope. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts and if you have struggled with that when you choose your topics for your stories, and what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, for me, it's to be authentic. When I am writing a story, I focus on the positive in the authentic way. Because if I want to talk about Mexican, I don't have to talk about their sombreros or singing rancheras or eating tacos. There are so many wonderful things to talk about Mexico, and also in my country, El Salvador. So I go for the positive. I think that the positive and the authentic is the most powerful thing to talk about it. So children can love their culture and language.
And also where you're picking the books. So, Las Americas Award winners, Pura Belpré winners, Asian Pacific literature winners. I think that you want the best examples, because when books are selected for those lists, sometimes I think those questions come up. Does this book authentically portray the experience, but also respectfully portray the experience? I write about folks, often families, who are from moderate to low income, but I think respectfully and in a way that doesn't show them as broken or excessive suffering and so on. So I think it's developing a palette for where you're searching for those books. And I'm always encouraged when people are looking for them, and I ask you to continue to ask your librarians and your booksellers, exert that sort of pressure. I don't know if you feel that way. Your request of that material and your conversation at that level with your local librarian is important. It's essential because it raises their awareness and cues them into the developing conversation, because the conversation is getting more interesting. It is getting more sophisticated. We are not just thankful that anything is published. We're really holding things to higher standards now.
I think we have...
Go ahead. Go ahead. I was going to say, I think that's the...
well, I think if there's one last question, somebody's been...
I was waiting, which I don't do very well, so this is good. Less of a question, and again, more of a comment and gratitude. Having worked with a large diversity of population, from a homogenous school to an elite private school, now I'm at a large urban school in Northern Virginia, probably one of the most diverse of Northern Virginia, if not in the country, and having a large number of immigrants. Read aside, and students not reading for pleasure is a whole other panel. We could spend several days discussing that. But getting books in their hands that make sense, students have lost the ability to hear their own voice or to hear other voices in books, and they don't know what those sound like and what those varying characters look like. We have to teach that. And so when a student picks up a book and they can read about a character that's like them and like their background, it's critical to engaging them. So keep doing what you're doing, and thank you.
Good ending. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.